Welcome to Coffee with a GAD, the podcast from the Realtors Association of South Central Wisconsin. I'm Robert Procter, Government Affairs Director at Raskow. Today we're talking about a flexible, often overlooked housing option that's gaining attention here in Wisconsin and across the country, accessory dwelling units or ADUs. Whether you know them as backyard cottages, in-law suites, or granny flats, ADUs are becoming an important tool in helping older adults age in place, supporting multi-generational living, and expanding housing options in tight markets. To help us understand how ADUs fit into the larger housing picture, we're joined by Darren Wisniewski, Senior Associate State Director with AARP Wisconsin. AARP has been a strong advocate for policies that support aging in place and livable communities, and they've been at the forefront of the conversation around ADUs here in the state. Darren, thanks so much for being here. Can you start by telling us a little about yourself and your role with AARP?
As you mentioned, I'm a associate state director for community outreach with AARP Wisconsin. And my role in relating to the topic here is I co-lead our efforts for livable communities around the state. And in particular, I deal with local advocacy around housing and transportation. And so work in local communities with policymakers and our advocates in those communities to have change for that supports older adults, or anybody as they grow older.
For those who may not know, what does AARP do and who do you serve?
ARP is one of the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy organizations, nonprofit organizations. We have about 38 million members across the country. We have a little over 800,000 members here in the state of Wisconsin.
Let's talk about housing. How did housing issues and ADUs in particular become a focus for AARP?
Many people don't know, but housing is our origin story. Way back when our founder, Dr. Ethel Percy Andrus, she was a retired school administrator, and she was looking up a former teacher of hers, and she had an address in California. So she went to the address, and they said that she was in the backyard. And so she went into the backyard, and there were some kids playing there, and she asked for this teacher, and they said, well, she's in her house. And she said, well, no, I was just in the house, and they told me she was back here, and they said, no, her house. And they pointed to what was an abandoned chicken coop that in her retirement, this teacher could not afford anything else to live in but an abandoned chicken coop. And Dr. Ethel Percy Andrus, while I don't know what she said, I'd like to think it was probably along the lines of, nobody that's dedicated a life to teaching our students should ever, our children, ever live in a chicken coop as they retire. So she formed the National Retired Teachers Association, and then from that, soon after, AARP came about.
That's a great story and one that I didn't know. How is today's housing market affecting older adults? Are they seeing any differences between what older and younger populations are experiencing, especially
I
here?
think unfortunately in all of this, older adults is wrapped up in the same conundrum that younger folks are. As we look at that the housing that we're all facing, and the situations that we have, we hear from our members through a number of surveys that they want to either um, grow older in their home or their neighborhood as they grow older, and you know most homes weren't built with a universal design or accessibility in mind. So growing older in your own home is a little dangerous at times. And definitely neighborhoods, especially ones that are proliferated by zoning for just one type of housing, don't allow you to grow older in there, where you might need a little bit of less space. And so, older adults are feeling the pinch right now, where we see that, pardon me, many one and two person households are living in 3 and 4 bedroom homes. These might be homes that they raised their children in or their families, or they've had a long time, but they can't necessarily leave them because there's nothing else for them to go to. And so they just stay there. And so we hear a lot of the concerns from the younger generation that there's no housing for us and people are staying in their houses, but it's because there's no housing for older adults either. They want to stay there. We know that the research says that if they can stay in their neighborhood for as long as possible, that's great for their quality of life. And so we want to make sure that that's available. And that's really why ARP has gotten into the whole idea of housing and, particularly ADUs, that this was a great, I know you asked the question before and I didn't answer it, but why ADUs? ARP views accessory dwelling units as a great opportunity for somebody to um, design something in universal or accessible design in their own backyard that they can stay there, they can stay with their friends and the connections they've made, but in a safer environment or smaller environment. And then they could either rent out the front house if they want extra income. It could be a family member that moves in there that maybe needs a home, or it could be a caretaker that moves in there. Whatever that might be, it provides a lot of options for somebody to stay in their home safely.
That's really interesting and very helpful. Let's break it down just a little bit for those of us who are for those people out there that aren't familiar with ADUs. What exactly is an ADU?
So an ADU or accessory dwelling unit, I think is, the proper term. You also heard them called, granny flats or backyard cottages. It's a secondary living unit. Many times they're separate, a separate structure in the backyard. Sometimes people had them over garages. I lived for a number of years in a neighborhood in Columbus, Ohio, where carriage houses were prolific all over that neighborhood. There were apartments up above garages. But ADUs can also be attached to an existing house. They can also be within the existing house, and it depends a lot on what each municipality allows, whether they require them one way or the other, or allow all forms.
Do ADUs work just in the cities, or are you also seeing them useful in the rural communities?
No, I've had conversations with folks in rural areas, and those are really just as uh, popular there, or at least the conversations are talking about it. Because, if we think about it, especially if you live out on a little bit of land, or maybe I think of my wife's family, where the house they lived in was built in 1840, really not designed for accessibility, but to have something, that is more aptly designed for their needs as they grow older, a little bit smaller, and provide them the opportunity to stay there.
No, that's great information to know because it's difficult. We don't see them as much in the rural areas. What are the biggest barriers to building ADUs that you hear about?
We hear from a variety of fronts, and depending on where it is you're trying to build, the first might be barriers from the zoning code that are there. So that's why ARP has released a whole local zoning ordinance suggestion, a local and statewide zoning ordinance for ADUs. And so we have it all written. So if a municipality doesn't have it or wants to see where they can help evolve their zoning code, we've got you covered there. And it's really listed as a good, better, best proposition. How do we grease up the wheels to make it as easy as possible to build these? Because most people who are going to develop their ADU, they're not a professional developer. It's a homeowner that hasn't really done this. And so how do we make it as easy as possible for them to do? They're still going to have to go over building codes. So, that I think that kind of translates into the next one is, these aren't inexpensive to build. I know, we've heard some concerns whenever we've talked about ADUs that, oh, this ramshackle cottage is going to go up in the backyard. Well, no, it still has to be designed to current building codes. So it's going to be a stable structure, just like any house in the neighborhood. But with that comes, a cost to that. And then depending on, how the municipality rates it, some of them will allow you to tap into the water or sewer in the main house. Others say they have to be separate lines. And so all of those add up in the cost. So the cost becomes an issue there. And then the last part becomes financing. We've heard from financing agents that banks just really don't know how to finance these things. They're not separate units, so although they cost as much as a house to build, they really can't be separated out. And so, many people either, self-finance or take a home equity line of credit or something like that to build it. But there's still that gray area on how do we get these financed for people to make it, as easy as possible. So I think, right now what I'm seeing is we're not seeing a big boom of them. California has them going up all over the place. But here in Wisconsin, the conversation has just started, and we just have to keep tweaking things as we go along, and eventually they'll all fall in place, and we'll be able to build these easier.
To that line about staying on um, this great opportunity for many people, the AARP, RASCO, the City of Madison, and others are partnering on an ADU design competition. How do you see that helping raise awareness and encourage more ADU development?
I think this is a great way of people just recognizing what they what these dwellings are and what they can be, and also begin to think about how do they fit into a typical yard in Madison, because a lot of times people can't imagine it if they can't see it. And so, just being able to get these drawings out there and having folks from, as we've seen in other design competitions held within the state, like in Altoona and just most recently last year in La Crosse, I mean, they had architects and designers from Minnesota and all across Wisconsin and Northern Illinois that had submitted plans. And so you get this really, just varied thoughts about how these can look and what they can look like and how they can function in a backyard, from the most basic shelter to something that is, really elaborate.
And I should add just to that, that those listening, we will be sending out more information about the ADU design competition. And the judging of it will actually take place during Madison Housing Week, which is the week of October 19th. Darren, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that's
You
the
got that
correct
right?
week. And there'll be a number of events around housing sponsored by the AARP, RASCOW. Madison is for people and other groups, including the announcement of the design winners. And Darren, again, I think you're a little bit more familiar with this than I am, but the designs that win will be automatically approved designs to be used in Madison by the City of Madison Planning Division. Is that correct?
Has been some interest expressed. We haven't worked out all the details on that just yet, but there is some interest in having these pre-approved plans, and that gets a part of the part of the cost in doing these. As a smaller dwelling, you still have to hire somebody to design these, and so with the pre-approved plan, it really makes it easier for the homeowner to come on at a lesser cost.
Thank you. Beyond ADUs, are there other ways that the Realtors Association can support AARP's housing work?
We're trying to look holistically around at housing choice and housing options. So always looking at, just joining us in our efforts to how do we make it so possible that, we don't just have one type of house in an area. So, looking at the zoning changes that go on there, and are there opportunities then to support that and to work with the city of Madison to change those things. We also, recognizing that policy only goes so far, ARP last year had launched a pilot project in the state called the Wisconsin Town Makers. And so this was really a way to build up the citizen developer again. Who's that smaller scale developer? Because back in the day, anybody could be a developer. You had somebody, designing and putting up their own, duplex or whatnot on their lot. We've really gotten with regulations and everything, it's gotten to be a challenge. And so we're just trying to really empower that citizen developer again who could do these smaller scale projects. And so Madison is one of the pilot communities, along with La Crosse and Appleton. And so these meet monthly. And so just encourage folks to come out. We have some realtors that participate in the conversation in Madison. And that's always helpful, to how to build this ecosystem of support around the smaller developer, that the knowledge that the realtors have about the market conditions and what's selling and what people are looking for can really help design projects that a smaller scale developer might want to tackle. Yeah, when you allow them by right across, any zoning district in the community, you're really not just pigeonholing where these can go. And so you're providing homeowners across the municipality the opportunity to put these in. Again, as long as they fit the building code. And so it'll still be subject to the setbacks and things like you'd have to do, with any normal construction. But it just takes away the uncertainty and the risk that if I'm going to propose this, will it be approved? And so you can move forward a little bit with more certainty. You can, think about your plans and what this looks like. And usually I'm most familiar with the Madison ordinance. It's pretty clear like what size. So your average homeowner that's not savvy to any of this can truly understand, hey, what's the lot coverage look like, and what do I need to meet, or what are the setbacks, and where do I need to worry about side yards and rear yards and what those things go on, and with any of those, I'm sure I know Madison is always open to questions if you have them. Their building department and most municipalities are. If you're planning these out, it gives you an opportunity to talk to them. But at least knowing it's by right it then begins to, take away the uncertainty as if it can have it. It also saves time and cost. Like if you had to get a variance for this, or something, they say, well, we approve them with a variance. Well, number one, that's time, because you have to go probably before a couple of different boards or commissions to make that happen for public hearings. And then, cost. And if you're doing this as a homeowner and this isn't your full-time job, it might not fit with your schedule and make it next to impossible. So the by right edition is sort of the bedrock of where we start, that they just make them allowable. And the sample ADU ordinances that ARP has, we have a couple other suggestions in there. um, one of them that most recently happened in Madison, which we firmly supported, was removing the homeownership requirement. Unfortunately, many municipalities think, well, we'll make sure either the front house or the ADU has to be occupied by a property owner, and it stops the rental agreement. That creates its own barriers when you do that, and most particularly, we've heard from finance institutions that have said, we're not sure if we're willing to lend on this. Already you take a sketchy lending situation or a higher risk situation as they're apt to try to avoid. And then when they say, if we happen to foreclose on this property and we're not the homeowner, like who's going to live there in order to comply with this rule? And so, just by removing those, is really helpful. With the accessory dwelling unit ordinances, ARP's experience across the country is having these just be evolutions, not thinking that these things are set in stone the minute they pass, that, have your ordinance put in place and use a feedback loop. Are we getting applications? Are we not getting applications? So what are we hearing for some people that might be the barriers to doing that? And can we make tweaks to do that? And that's where the sample ordinances can really help you to see what are the next level things that we can do in order to make this happen. I know, in California, I've heard, it took many, many, many iterations before the floodgates happened. And I was just at a conference and we were just talking about housing in general and trying to get the smaller scale development, the ADUs done. And somebody said, it's sort of like you have multiple deadlocks on your apartment door, and by turning one of them isn't necessarily going to open. You just have to keep going until you get all those locks open, and you might not know when it happened, but when it will, it'll make it easier and remove the friction for building these units.
Darren, one of the things you talked about was how successful ADUs have been in other parts of the country. Both you and I run into this a lot, and I'm very understanding of people. When somebody buys a house, it's one of the largest investments they make, and they're happy with the way things are right now in the neighborhood or in the area where they're buying because they've obviously bought a house as it looks today. And so you run into a lot of people.
I am not aware of any, and talking to my colleagues from around the country, that when these go in, they provide a necessary housing option. Um, Again, they're not, inexpensive to put up, so it's not like this, shoddy housing that's going on that can be rented, cheaply. And this also gives an opportunity to size for the rents that you're trying to get. The ADU is that perfect thing that, do you need 500 square feet, or, in Madison, you can go up to 1,000 square feet, on the footplate. And so it doesn't mean you have to build 1,000 square foot your ADU. Maybe you just want to allow, a smaller place you can charge less rent on that, or that's all the space that you need. And so this provides that flexibility in doing any of those things. We've seen, in other markets where this has actually helped to stabilize and decrease the rent slightly. Not like a total shock to the system now where everybody's, losing money, but it helps just to bring the rent burden down a little bit on the renter, and still allow these units to get out there. And they provide a great opportunity. We've talked a lot about older adults, but these are actually great housing options for young people too. Maybe early career professionals, or we hear so often teachers or entry level police officers can't live in the communities they serve because they can't afford it. So here are those opportunities to provide housing like this in our neighborhoods that are already typically served by you know, walking connected paths and sidewalks, maybe a transit stop nearby, whatever that might be. This provides that opportunity to be in those neighborhoods without adding any extra infrastructure costs to the city, and not expanding, roads and sewer systems and water systems out, which is going to be a liability, 25, 30 years down the road. That this is already in areas that stuff is built. So it's a more sustainable approach, financially sustainable approach for cities to allow this gentler density into their neighborhoods.
Thank you, Darren. It's been just great working with you. And for those out there listening, we will put a link to more information regarding the small developer program that the AARP does. That's a great way for anybody interested in doing something that might be a little bit more within your comfort zone to learn how to do it. Darren, thank you again for joining us. Thank you for all the work you've done across the state. Thank you for all the work you've done with us on so many ordinance updates and on Housing Week last year. And we look forward to continuing to work in the future with you.
I look forward to it as well. It's been my pleasure.
And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. As realtors, you're on the front lines of housing access, and understanding emerging tools like the ADUs can help you better serve your clients and communities. We'll be back with more episodes soon as we continue exploring the issues shaping the future of housing in South Central Wisconsin and beyond. Until then, take care.